Today, I will tell you a story, one that was never meant to be spoken aloud. It is said to come from a scroll hidden beneath centuries of dust, a record of truths too heavy for the living to carry. So listen carefully, for this is not myth, it is memory. And now we begin. Long before the Temple of Solomon rose in golden shadow, before the ark was carried through wilderness and war, the elders of Israel whispered of another record, a covenant older than the stone tablets, older than Sinai itself. They spoke its name only once in a generation, and always in fear. The archive of Moses, not the law, not the commandments. Something deeper. A chronicle he wrote in the nights when the mountain still burned, when the voice of the Almighty thundered like a storm trapped beneath the earth. The elders claimed that Moses recorded the visions that tore through his spirit in the 40 days of solitude, revelations not meant for the tribes, nor for the priests, nor even for the prophets who would come long after. Some said the archive was a book of creation. Others said it was a book of judgment. But the oldest tradition whispered another possibility, that Moses saw what came before Eden, and that he wrote it down. The scroll was said to be bound in desert linen, sealed with a thread of red clay that crumbled at the touch of unworthy hands. Only the high priest of each generation knew of its hiding place, a chamber beneath the ark's resting stone, carved so deep into the bedrock that torches could not chase away the darkness. The darkness lived there. In that chamber, the archive waited, listening for footsteps that never came. For after the death of Solomon, when the kingdom shattered and the temple trembled beneath Babylon's siege, the priests made a choice that echoed like thunder across centuries. They erased the book from the memory of Israel, not by burning it, not by burying it, but by moving it where even angels were forbidden to walk, below the foundations, below the earth, below the silence of God. What Moses wrote, they said, could not be allowed to rise again, for it contained a truth too heavy for nations, too holy for kings, and too dangerous for wandering souls. But stone cracks, dust shifts, secrets stir. And now, after generations of forgotten prayers, the archive calls to the world once more. The forbidden book is waking. They say there was a night on Sinai that never entered the common scrolls. The camp slept under a trembling sky. The pillars of smoke and fire dimmed to an ember over the mountain, as if the presence had drawn inward, concentrating itself into a silence that made even the stones hold their breath. The elders lay in their tents, dreaming fearful dreams, while sheep shivered without knowing why. And Moses was alone with God. The law had already been given in thunder, commandments carved into stone, covenant sealed with blood. But that night, the voice did not speak of statutes or ordinances. It did not speak of feasts or offerings or the borders of a promised land. It spoke of before dust, before rivers, before Eden's gate. No scribe stood nearby to hear it. No Levite sharpened his reed over a clay lamp. The mountain itself became the witness, its veins of rock ringing like distant music as the words poured through the soul of one man. Later, when he descended with his face shining and the people drew back in terror, they saw the tablets. They heard the law. They trembled beneath the weight of what they must now obey. But they did not know that there was something else. Hidden in the folds of his garment, wrapped in plain linen, was another record. Lines carved not with a stylus, but with a hand that shook from what it had seen, not revelation meant for a nation, but visions meant for a single human heart. Too terrible to leave unspoken, too holy to share. The archive began that night. Moses wrote of a time when there was no time, when the deep was not yet divided, when the music of the underworld rose like smoke from a fire not yet kindled on earth. He wrote of light that never reached the gates of heaven, light that circled beneath, in chambers where no bird has flown and no wind has passed. He saw beings made of radiance and shadow, older than the stars they would one day watch ignite. Some rose in worship, bending their brilliance before the one who needed no praise. Others turned their faces away, choosing a song that did not belong to heaven. The fallen did not fall as stones fall. They fell as notes that refused to harmonize. Moses watched as these ancient lights descended, not yet into Eden, not yet into flesh, but into the dark corridors beneath the worlds, taking seats like judges in a court that had not yet convened. And he understood for a moment that nearly broke him, that creation would not only be a work of beauty, it would be a work of risk. So he wrote. He wrote of souls weighed not by scales of gold, but by their own memories, rising around them like incense, sweet or bitter. He wrote of a silence that was not absence, but judgment withheld, God waiting, listening, patient beyond the patience of ages. These words did not belong beside, "You shall not steal," and "Remember the Sabbath day." They pulsed with another kind of fire. So when Moses returned to the people, he taught them the laws that would guide their hands and their harvests, their altars, and their gates. He gave them commandments they could obey with sandals on their feet and dust on their robes. But at night, when the camp settled and the desert sky burned with 1,000,000 watching eyes, he unwrapped the hidden linen and read again what he had written in terror and awe. He knew this record was not for Israel. It was for those who would one day seek why God made a world that could break. Before his death, he entrusted the archive to the care of those who would bear the ark, commanding them in words not preserved in any public scroll. They were to keep it where even kings could not reach, where curious hands could not turn its pages like a common story. A book written in the shadow of God's face, he said, must live in shadow. Generations later, when scribes copied the histories and prophets recounted the visions, they spoke of Sinai, of thunder, of law. But they did not speak of the night that was not written. Only in the deepest schools of the priests, in rooms where incense never fully cleared, and the walls sweated with old oil and breathless prayers, the elders still whispered, "There is another book, not for Israel, not for now, a record of beginnings that can only be read when the end begins to approach." The archive waited, buried under stone, guarded by silence, carrying in its fragile fibers the memory of a man who once saw too much and wrote it down so the world would not be shattered by seeing it all at once. And far above, the mountain that had watched it all crumbled slowly under wind and time, its secret night forgotten by those who counted only days. Yet heaven does not forget. The pages that no one turned still radiated with the echo of a voice that had spoken them, holding in their quiet lines a question that would one day demand to be answered. What happens when the book that was never meant to be opened is opened? The generations after Moses remembered the law. They remembered the tablets. They remembered the wilderness that shaped them. But they did not remember the archive. Only one lineage carried its memory. Not the kings, not the prophets, but the keepers of the ark, a narrow brotherhood of priests whose duty passed quietly from father to son like a burden no one wished to inherit. They were chosen for discipline, not brilliance, for silence, not glory, for fear, not ambition. Each man on the night of his anointing was led beneath the temple into corridors no torch could fully illuminate. The walls were slick with ancient moisture, as though the stones themselves exhaled. Every step echoed as if someone followed, though no feet touched the path behind them. At the end stood a single threshold, a door of cedar blackened by centuries, sealed with pitch, and marked with a symbol that later scholars could never name, a circle broken by 3 descending lines. The priests called it the mark of descent, the oldest warning they knew. Only the high priest could cross it. He entered alone, and when he stepped out again, his beard damp with the cold air of the under foundation, his voice never carried the same warmth again. Something in that chamber drained the unnecessary parts of a man. The laughter, the pride, the sense that life could be lived lightly. The archive did not kill, it subdued. Inside the chamber lay a low pedestal of stone, carved from the mountain that once burned under God's feet. Upon it rested a bundle of linen older than the kingdom, older than the temple, older than even the memory of Solomon's father. The book, the forbidden archive. The high priest would kneel, unfold the linen with trembling care, and read only a single line aloud. One line, no more, for the mind could not hold 2. When the linen closed again, light returned to the chamber, though no lamp had been lit. Some lines spoke of the first fire, the fire that had no warmth. Others spoke of a silence so vast that the universe itself trembled in it. Once, a priest emerged with tears seeping into his beard, having read a sentence describing the moment when angels first understood fear. The archive had chapters, but they were not numbered. It had revelations, but they did not follow one another like stories. Each line was a world, each word a knife of light. And every high priest knew this truth. If Israel ever learned what Moses saw, nothing would remain unchanged. Not worship, not sacrifice, not the understanding of heaven or earth. So the brotherhood vowed an oath stronger than iron, deeper than blood. They would guard it, hide it, protect Israel not from enemies, but from knowledge too ancient for human breath. For centuries they succeeded. No king breached the chamber, no prophet demanded its unveiling, no scholar guessed its existence. But time is a chisel sharper than bronze. When empires shifted and the temple shook under foreign boots, the oath was tested. Babylon pressed against the walls. The smoke of its armies darkened the sky. The priests gathered in the innermost court, stones trembling beneath their feet. Then came the night, the stars hid themselves. A shadow passed over Jerusalem, like a bird of prey circling for the kill. The air grew thick with dust. The ark was lowered into darkness to save it from desecration, but the archive stirred. Something in the chamber pulsed, not with fear, but with memory, as though the book recognized the footsteps of destruction, as though it waited for the moment foretold in its first unwritten line. The youngest priest whispered, "It wants to be found." The eldest replied, "That is why we must bury it deeper." And so began the great concealment, a decision that would shape centuries, erase whole histories, and cast a shadow across every sacred scroll copied after. A decision that would exile the archive not merely from sight, but from the world of men entirely. How they hid it, how they severed it from the temple, how they ensured it would never again lie beneath human hands. That is the secret of the next part. The night Babylon approached Jerusalem, the temple stones quivered as if they remembered the thunder on Sinai. The air was thick with dust, and torches shook in the wind, their flames bending toward the Holy of Holies as though drawn by an unseen breath. The priests gathered around the ark, but their voices were not chants of protection. They were whispers of fear, for the archive, the book they had sworn never to utter, pulsed beneath the floor like a heartbeat awakening after centuries of enforced silence. No human hand had opened it in generations, yet the linen wrappings trembled softly, as though stirred by a wind that did not belong to earth. The high priest understood. If the conquerors seized the temple, the archive would be discovered, and the world would choke on a truth it was never meant to swallow. So he made a final command, written in no scroll, and remembered by only 7 men. We bury not a book, but a wound in creation. Let no nation touch it. Let no priest recall it. Let even heaven forget where we send it. And they began the ritual of concealment. There was a chamber deeper than the ark's foundation, so deep that even the masons who carved it did not know they carved it. The priests guided their hands generation after generation, building a labyrinth beneath the temple, a descent into darkness that did not match the geometry of any earthly design. Some said the plans for it were whispered by an angel who had fallen but not yet rebelled. Others said Moses himself had drawn its first lines in sand, the color of night. The priests descended with the archive wrapped in its linen. The youngest trembled. The eldest leaned on his staff until his knuckles whitened. The passage narrowed until it resembled a throat of stone. Torches dimmed, then sputtered, then refused to burn at all. The last steps were taken in darkness so complete that each man wondered if he had gone blind. And then the air changed. The darkness was no longer empty. It watched. In a cavern carved not by tools, but by something older than hands, the priests set the archive upon a slab of unknown metal, darker than obsidian, colder than death, and smooth as still water. The metal hummed faintly at first, then louder, resonating like a distant choir singing beneath the earth. No word was spoken. To speak would have invited witness. The high priest lifted the book one last time. His breath shook. The linen unraveled like the shedding of ancient skin, revealing the faded lines carved by Moses in the firelight of Sinai. For a heartbeat, the priests saw the first phrase of the archive not as words, but as memory, a memory not belonging to any man. Each priest dropped to his knees, hands covering faces as though the light might cut through their skulls. They trembled until the high priest closed the linens again, smothering the radiance back into silence. Then he placed the archive onto the metal slab. At once, the cavern breathed inward. A gust of freezing wind spiraled around the priests, extinguishing every trace of warmth. The slab sank, swallowed by the metal, as though it had never been separate from it. The book vanished without sound. The priest staggered back. The youngest whispered, "Where did it go?" The high priest answered, "To a place where only God remembers." And with that, the metal closed. Not a seam remained, not a line, not a shadow of a page. The archive was gone, not buried, not hidden, removed. Yet the chamber still remembered it. The stone still trembled. The darkness still watched. The priests sealed the passage, collapsing walls and filling the labyrinth with rubble. They left no map, no markings, no chant of remembrance. They climbed back to a temple that would soon burn. And when Babylon breached the gates, the conquerors found gold and incense, but not the archive, nor did the exiled priests speak of it. Not in Babylon, not in the return to Jerusalem, not in the rebuilding. The memory faded like smoke rising from a forgotten altar. But memory is not the same as silence. For deep beneath the earth, where even angels rarely pass, something old still stirred, waiting for the moment promised in its first line, written long before Moses ever touched the tablets of stone. A moment that is drawing closer. Centuries passed, empires rose and crumbled. Prophets spoke, fell silent, and were remembered only in echo. The temple was rebuilt, but not as it had been. Its foundations shifted, its corridors changed, the labyrinth beneath it, the impossible geometry carved for the burial of a revelation, lay forgotten, swallowed by time, dust, and foreign stones. Yet some memories refused to die. In the generation before the coming of Rome, there lived a scribe named Elior, a quiet man with ink-stained fingers and a voice seldom raised above a whisper. He was not a priest, not a prophet, not a man of rank. He was a copyist of genealogies, the lowest task of all. But Elior had something the others lacked. He listened. And in the still hours between prayers, beneath the hum of the temple courts, he heard something no one else heard, a hum, a pulse, a trembling far below the stone. At first, he thought it was his imagination, the phantom vibration of long nights spent copying brittle scrolls by candlelight. But the sound persisted, threading itself through the silence, like a single note of a song whose other notes were lost. It came from deep beneath the foundations. Elior tried to ignore it, but the sound followed him. When he walked the outer courts, he heard it. When he slept in the scribe's chamber, he heard it. When he prayed alone, the hum rose beneath the prayer as though echoing a word older than all petitions. And with each passing season, the hum grew stronger. One night, during the Feast of Lights, Elior stood in the courtyard while thousands lifted flames to heaven. The sky shimmered with gold and smoke. Priests sang psalms. Children spun in circles with candles in their hands. And then it happened. The hum surged upward. It rolled through the stones like a wave. Elior gasped and grabbed the marble railing as the vibration traveled into his bones. No one else reacted. No one heard. No one felt. Except him. In that moment, Elior understood. The archive was waking. He did not know its name. He did not know its history. He did not know the oath made by 7 priests in the dark. But something beneath the temple recognized him, the way a forgotten memory recognizes the mind it once lived in. In the days that followed, Elior began his search. He questioned masons, scribes, aging priests whose eyes had grown soft with time. He searched architectural scrolls, records of the first temple, fragments of stories told by exiles long dead. But all accounts agreed. There were no chambers beneath the Holy of Holies. There were no sealed passages. There was no lost record of Moses. Everything said no. But the hum said yes. And Elior knew that the truth of God does not lie in the mouths of men who have forgotten his mysteries. One winter night, after the temple lamps had dimmed and the courts rested in silence, Elior gathered his courage. He carried no torch, for he feared light might draw eyes. He carried only a reed knife, a small lamp of clay, and a trembling hope. He descended the lesser stair, then the older stair, then the stair no one used. At the bottom lay a cracked stone door rarely opened, its hinges coated with centuries of dust. Elior pushed. The door creaked like a wounded creature, and stale air spilled out, thick with the scent of old incense and older secrets. He stepped into the forgotten corridor. The hum intensified. Not loud, never loud, but unmistakable, like a pulse beneath the pulse of the world. Elior followed it deeper, past walls whose carvings had been scraped away, past arches that leaned as though resisting memory. He was close. He could feel it. Then, at the end of the passage, he found a fallen slab of cedar, blackened by time. Beneath it, half buried in debris, lay a symbol he did not know, a circle, broken by 3 descending lines, the mark of descent. Elior touched it with his fingertips, and the hum stopped. Not faded, not dimmed, stopped. Silence collapsed around him like a heavy cloak. The air thickened. His breath hung in front of him. He felt suddenly watched, not by eyes, but by the weight of something ancient waiting behind the stone. He whispered, trembling, "What are you?" The silence answered not with words, but with a memory, one not his own, a flash of radiance, a mountain burning, a voice that shook the deep, and a man writing by firelight, his hands trembling as the first forbidden line carved itself through his soul. Elior staggered back, gasping. He knew then. He had brushed against a boundary meant only for the chosen of long ago. Yet he also knew something else, something whispered into his spirit. Like a breath, the world was growing close to the hour Moses had feared. The archive was no longer content to sleep. The next part of the story begins when Elior returns the following night, and the stone door is no longer closed. Elior did not sleep that night. He lay awake on his thin mat, heart hammering like a drum beneath his ribs, the memory of the silent vision burning behind his eyes. He knew he should tell someone, a priest, a scribe of higher rank, anyone with the authority to judge what he had seen. But he also knew what would happen if he spoke. They would silence him, not to punish, but to protect. For Elior had touched something older than Scripture, older than law, older than the temple whose shadow covered his trembling body. And men fear what predates their certainties. So he waited for darkness. When the last lamps guttered out and the priests retreated to their chambers, he wrapped himself in a simple cloak and slipped back toward the forbidden stair, guided not by torchlight, but by memory. And something else. The hum had returned, faint, steady, calling him. He descended the ancient steps once more, passing the cracked door that groaned softly at his touch, as though remembering him. He squeezed through the narrow gap and into the corridor, where shadows clung to the walls like old prayers. But something was different. The air felt disturbed, as if moved by something that had recently passed through. Dust lay in patterns like ripples in water, and at the far end, where the blackened cedar slab had rested, where the mark of descent had slept for centuries, the stone door stood open. Elior froze. No wind could have shifted it. No animal could have moved it. No priest claimed knowledge of this place, and yet the door had opened, as if waiting for him. He stepped forward, each breath shallow, each footstep measured, as though one wrong sound might wake the dead. The air grew colder with every step, a cold that did not come from earth, but from absence. An emptiness so profound, it hollowed the soul. Inside the doorway stretched a stair, descending into impossible darkness. No torch burned within. No lamp could pierce such shadows. Yet something at the bottom glowed, not light, not fire. Memory. It pulsed in pale waves, illuminating nothing, yet making itself visible in the mind, like a dream that refuses to be forgotten. Elior stood at the top of the stair, shaking. His lips moved in a prayer he did not remember learning. The hum beneath the temple, the sound that had haunted him for months, now matched the rhythm of his heart. It was alive, waiting, calling. He took the first step. The stone trembled beneath his foot, not with instability, but with intention, as though acknowledging him. When he descended the second step, the air grew heavy. On the third, he felt warmth brush past him, a warmth that carried sorrow. On the fourth step, he sensed a presence behind him. He turned. Nothing. Yet something lingered. Not a shape, not a shadow, but attention. The sensation of being watched not by eyes, but by time itself. He continued downward. The stair twisted, spiraling into a descent that felt longer than the height of the temple above. Elior lost track of steps, of direction, of breath. Only the silent glow remained, drawing him deeper into a place that should not exist. At last, his feet met level ground. The chamber before him was vast, yet he could see none of it. The darkness swallowed every outline, but in the center hovered something like smoke made of memory, drifting above an unseen pedestal. It pulsed gently, like the breath of a sleeping creature. Elior approached, trembling. The glow brightened, slightly, cautiously, revealing at last the object at its center. A linen-wrapped shape, suspended inches above the pedestal of dark metal. The archive. Though no hand touched it, it rotated slowly as though caught in the slow current of an unseen river. The linen was unchanged by time, unstained by earth, undisturbed by gravity. Elior reached out a single hand, not to touch, only to feel. But as his fingers neared the linen, the chamber responded. The hum rose from the floor, the air split like fabric tearing. A whisper filled the darkness, not in sound, but in meaning. Not yet. Elior stumbled back, his breath fogged in the freezing air. His knees weakened. Tears sprang to his eyes without knowing why, for the whisper carried something impossible, a grief not human, a weight not made for flesh. He tried to speak, but no voice came. The archive continued its slow rotation, one corner of the linen brushing the cold glow. And in that glow, Elior saw, for the briefest moment, a line carved into the inner fibers, a single word, not Hebrew, not Aramaic, not any tongue of earth. A word so ancient it felt like the memory of creation itself. Elior collapsed to his knees. The whisper came again, not yet. Then the glow dimmed, the hum faded, the chamber returned to silence, deeper than before, final, sealed. Elior stumbled backward up the stair, gasping, shaking, feeling as though he had touched the edge of a blade that held the world together. When he finally emerged into the corridor, the stone door closed behind him, not by hand, not by force, by will. He fled to the upper chambers, unsure whether he had been chosen or warned. for the archive had awakened enough to whisper, but not enough to reveal, and the hour that Moses feared had not yet come. For days after his descent into the hidden chamber, Elior wandered the temple courts like a man caught between worlds. His steps were unsteady, his thoughts unfocused, his eyes drawn always toward the stones underfoot, as though expecting them to tremble again. But the hum was silent. The whisper, "Not yet," echoed through his mind like a wound that would not close. And, though he tried to return to his duties, to the familiar comfort of ink and parchment, the memory of the archive haunted every quiet moment. It clung to him like dust on the fringe of his cloak. Others noticed. The senior scribes whispered that Elior had grown pale, withdrawn, touched by something that did not belong to mortal study. One evening, an elderly priest approached him, laying a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You look," the priest murmured, "as though you have heard a voice no man should hear." Elior said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. The priest's eyes widened, not in accusation, but in sorrow. He spoke softly, slowly, as though choosing words from a past he wished he had forgotten. "There are chambers," he said, "that were not meant for us, passages closed in the days of our fathers. We do not walk those depths. We do not listen for those echoes." Elior's pulse quickened. "What echoes?" he whispered. The priest did not answer immediately. His gaze shifted toward the innermost court, where incense trailed upward like thin ribbons of prayer. Finally he spoke. "In the oldest traditions," he said, "before the exile, before the burning, before Babylon came with its iron and fire, the high priests kept a record that no scroll mentions. A record hidden because it could not be borne." Elior felt a chill run through the marrow of his bones. The priest continued. "They called it the first witness, the thing Moses saw before he saw the law. They swore to bury it. They swore to forget it. And those who heard of it, even in rumor, prayed for their memories to fade." Elior swallowed. His voice cracked. "And if someone were to find it?" The priest's hand trembled. "Then heaven help us," he whispered, "for its hour has come." That night, Elior fled to the outer courtyard, desperate for solitude beneath the open sky. But solitude did not come. As he knelt in the dust, head bowed, breath uneven, a shadow fell across him. He looked up. A young woman stood there, a stranger. Her clothing marked her as one of the temple servants, though he did not recognize her face. She held a basket of oil lamps, yet none were lit, her eyes fixed on him with unsettling calm. "You went below," she said, not a question, a declaration. Elior rose slowly, heart hammering. "How do you know?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Because the dust has changed." He stared at her, shaken. "What dust?" She knelt, drawing a small shape in the ground with her finger. The symbol she traced made Elior's breath catch, a circle, broken by 3 descending lines, the mark of descent. "No one remembers this sign," Elior said hoarsely, "not even the priests." "But the dust remembers," she replied, and as she brushed her hand across the ground, Elior saw it clearly now, patterns he had overlooked, alignments of particles so subtle they resembled drifting sand at first glance. But when the pattern completed itself, the symbol appeared again and again, as though the earth itself whispered, "It stirs." The servant looked up, her expression solemn. "My mother saw this sign before the last war," she said. "She said it was the mark of a book that should never wake." Elior's voice broke. "It spoke to me." The young woman's face blanched, but she did not step back. Her whisper was barely audible. "Then the hour Moses feared is nearer than we thought." Wind swept across the courtyard, carrying dust into swirling patterns that formed and dissolved as quickly as breath. But every now and then, for a heartbeat, the mark of descent glimmered and faded beneath the moonlight. The servant's voice trembled. "Elior, the ground is remembering what the world forgot." "Why?" he asked. "Why now?" She closed her eyes. "Because something is coming. Something that was written before Eden. Something the archive held back until the world was ready." Her gaze locked onto his, or until the world was vulnerable. Elior felt the truth settle upon him like a shroud. He had not been chosen. He had been warned. But the warning was not meant only for him. It was meant for the world. And the next night, when the temple drums thundered for the new moon, the rumbling returned, stronger than before. So strong. The stones themselves seemed to breathe. That night, under the new moon's thin silver edge, the temple became a vessel of unease. Pilgrims filled the courts with offerings. Priests chanted ancient psalms. Singers lifted their voices in hymns meant to steady the heart of a nation that had suffered too many wars. Yet even as the rituals rose like incense, an unseen weight settled upon the stones, a heaviness that made the bravest feel suddenly small. Elior felt it first. The hum returned, not faint, not distant, but present, as if the foundations themselves exhaled beneath his feet. He stumbled against a column, clutching its cold surface as the vibration rolled through him, shaking his bones, hollowing the air inside his lungs. He gasped, unable to call for help. No one looked his way. No one else felt it. But he knew. The archive was stirring. The young woman, the servant with lamplight in her eyes, appeared beside him, as if summoned by the same unseen call. She held no basket tonight. Her hands were empty, except for the fear she could no longer hide. "Is it happening again?" she whispered. Elior nodded, unable to speak. The stones trembled, not violently, not enough to alarm the crowds, just enough to whisper, "Remember." A sound rose from beneath the earth, low, mournful, layered with tones older than music. It was not a voice, not a chant, not anything a human mouth could produce. It was the sound of a sealed truth shifting in its sleep. A priest near the altar paused mid-prayer, glancing around in confusion. A musician lowered his flute. A child clung to her mother's leg, crying without knowing why. The congregation shivered as a cold wind threaded through the court, though no wind stirred the torches. A tremor rippled through the marble. Elior felt it more deeply than any other, not beneath his feet, but beneath his soul. "Elior," the young woman breathed, "it's calling you." "No," he whispered, trembling, "it is calling the world." And then, silence. A silence so sudden, so absolute, it swallowed every sound. The chanting halted, the music died, breaths held, even the flames atop the altar froze in place, as if stunned by the stillness. Then the stones spoke, not aloud, not in words, but in memory. Images flooded Elior's mind, not visions he conjured, but recollections etched into the world before memory existed. A boundless void, a flame without fire, creatures formed from radiance, kneeling before an unseen throne. A single note breaking the harmony of eternity, a descent, a judgment withheld, the archive. He saw the linen-wrapped books suspended in darkness, rotating slowly, waiting like a sealed prophecy, and he saw something else. Hands, countless hands reaching for it from across time. Kings, prophets, conquerors, scribes, nations unborn, all reaching, none permitted. The memory shattered. Elior collapsed, coughing, clutching the ground as the young woman knelt beside him. "What did you see?" she whispered. He shook his head, tears blurring his vision. "A warning," he rasped. "Not to read it." Her brow tightened. "Then why does it wake?" Elior lifted trembling fingers to the stone tiles beneath them, where faint dust patterns swirled into the mark of descent again and again, as if written by invisible breath. "Because," he whispered, voice breaking, "something is coming, something the world has forgotten, something the archive was meant to restrain." The young woman's hands tightened on his arms. "Then we must tell someone." "No," Elior gasped, shaking his head. "The priests buried it. They swore to erase it. If we speak, they will silence us. They fear knowledge older than creation." She hesitated. "So what do we do?" Elior looked toward the inner court, where the Holy of Holies loomed in shadow, its sanctity trembling as though listening. "We wait," he whispered, "for the archive to choose." The hum faded again, retreating into the deep like a tide returning to the sea. The temple resumed its sounds, prayers, music, footsteps, as though nothing had happened. But dozens of worshippers glanced toward the ground. Others shivered. Some wept without cause. And in the hidden labyrinth below the temple, darkness shifted like breath on glass. The archive was no longer content to whisper. Soon it would speak. In the days that followed the trembling, Jerusalem carried on as if nothing had stirred beneath its feet. Merchants called out their prices. Children ran through the alleys with clay toys in hand. Priests recited the Psalms as they always had. The world appeared unchanged. But Elior knew better. The hum had not returned, and that was what terrified him. Silence is the final breath before revelation. Silence is the tightening of the bowstring before release, and beneath that silence the archive waited. He felt it in every stone he walked upon, in every quiet space between prayers, in every shadow cast by walls older than memory. The young woman felt it too. She stood with him in the outer court each evening, watching the ground as though expecting it to split open. On the fourth night, she spoke. "It's not sleeping," she said softly. "It's listening." Elior swallowed. "For what?" Her eyes lifted toward the sky. "For permission." That same evening, as the moon climbed over the eastern ridge, a sudden roar echoed from the valley. Not the roar of men, not the sound of beasts. A deep, resonant cry, like stone shifting under unbearable weight. The temple priests froze mid-chant. The worshippers looked around in panic. Dust drifted from the rafters, sparkling like embers. Then came the second sound. A crack, soft, distant, but unmistakable. A fracture beneath the world. The young woman gripped Elior's cloak as tremors rippled through the courtyard. People gasped. Lamps toppled. Several ran to the gates, convinced the earth had decided to swallow them alive. But Elior knew the truth. The labyrinth beneath the temple, the chambers carved for the burial of a revelation, had moved. Someone, or something, had opened a passage not walked by a human foot since Babylon's first siege. The priests shouted orders, torches flared, guards rushed to secure the inner courts. But Elior felt no fear of armies or disaster. His fear was of memory, a memory awakening. That night, he did not wait for darkness. He ran. He fled across the courtyard, through a side passage, and down the forgotten stair, his breath wild, his heart pounding like fists on a sealed door. The air grew colder the deeper he went. A faint mist had formed where none had been before. At the cracked cedar door, he froze. It stood wide open. The corridor beyond glowed with faint, colorless light, the light of memory, not flame. The young woman arrived behind him, breathless. "Elior, no." But Elior stepped forward. He entered the passage. The walls were different now. They pulsed faintly, as though remembering the hands that once carved them in fear. Symbols, long erased, shimmered like ghosts, visible only for an instant, before fading again. Fragments of a language older than the earth. With each step, Elior felt resistance, not physical, spiritual, as though the chamber tested him. He reached the stair where he once descended into absolute darkness. But this time, the stair was lit by the same pale glow, the luminosity of truth trying to escape its bonds. He descended. At the bottom, he saw the chamber and the archive. The linen-wrapped book no longer hovered over the pedestal. It stood upright, as though waiting to be read. The linen fluttered in an unfelt wind. A single thread dangled loose, pulled gently away from the knot that had sealed it for centuries. The pedestal's metal had cracked, a hairline fracture glowing like molten silver. Elior whispered, terrified, "It's opening." The young woman's voice trembled behind him. "No, something is opening it." Elior stepped closer. The linen shifted, slowly, deliberately, like a veil lifting from a bride's face. Elior fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his cheeks. His hands shook uncontrollably. Within the small gap of unfolding cloth, he saw something no human should see. Not words, not symbols, not lines carved by Moses' trembling hand. He saw a vision, a glimpse of a time before Eden, before angels, before breath, a world of pure will, pure law, pure possibility, a world unshaped yet foreseen, a world where souls were born as sparks of thought in the mind of the eternal. Then he saw another image, a shadow falling where no shadow should exist, a descent, a fracture in harmony, the first dissonant note in the music of creation. Elior choked on his own breath. The young woman pulled him away, sobbing, terrified. "Elior, look at me. What did you see?" He stared at her with hollow eyes. "The beginning," he whispered, "and the first betrayal." The glow dimmed. The linen closed, not fully, but enough to halt the vision. Elior collapsed into her arms, trembling from the weight of revelation. Behind them, the archive pulsed once more. Not softly, not timidly, but with purpose, preparing, calling, summoning. Something was coming, not darkness, not light, something older than both. And the final veil was about to tear. The chamber pulsed like a living heart, not loud, not wild, but steady, the rhythm of a truth awakening after millennia of enforced sleep. Elior clung to the young woman's arm as he rose unsteadily to his feet, his vision still trembling from the glimpse that had nearly broken him. The air was thick, heavy, alive with ancient memory. The metal pedestal cracked wider, glowing like a wound torn open by time itself. The archive stood upright, its linen wrappings loosening strand by strand, as though the book were unwrapping itself. The young woman's voice shook. "We must leave. Elior, we must leave now." But Elior shook his head. "I can't," he whispered. It called me here. The ground vibrated softly beneath them, not like an earthquake, but like a breath, drawn slowly, deeply, as if the hidden chamber were inhaling the air of the world above. A whisper rose, not sound, meaning. "Look." Elior stumbled forward. The linen unfurled further, revealing a section of the inner page. A page that was not parchment, not papyrus, not any earthly material. It shimmered like stone made of memory, shifting between light and shadow. On it, carved in a script older than the stars, was a single phrase, not readable, yet understood. "When the world forgets why it was made, the beginning shall rise to meet the end." Elior's breath left him in a cry. The young woman covered her mouth, tears falling silently. The phrase burned itself into Elior's spirit, not as knowledge, but as awakening. He felt the weight of ages, the trembling of uncounted generations, the slow gathering of a truth that had waited for a world distracted, divided, unfaithful to its own creation. The book continued to open. The chamber darkened around them, shadows stretching like hands across the floor. Memories flickered in the air. Visions of Moses trembling as he wrote, of angels descending in sorrow, of courts in heaven standing in silence, before pronouncements too heavy to speak aloud. Then came the voice, not thunder, not whisper, something between breath and eternity. "Elior, son of earth, why do you seek what was hidden?" Elior fell to his knees, forehead touching the cold stone. His voice trembled. "I did not seek it. It sought me." The voice stirred the darkness. Not to reveal, but to warn. The young woman crouched beside him, eyes wide, whispering as though speaking through a dream. "What is it warning us of?" The voice answered with a tremor that rippled through the chamber, through the stair, through the temple itself, a tremor carried by memory itself. "The world is approaching the hour Moses feared." Elior's heart froze. "What hour?" he whispered. The voice deepened, ancient, mournful, heavy with the sadness of creation itself. "The hour when knowledge returns to those who have forgotten wonder." The linen lifted slightly. The page glowed brighter. A second sentence appeared. "The final forgetting has begun." The young woman gasped, clutching Elior's arm. "What does that mean?" Elior's lips trembled. "It means," he whispered, "that humanity has forgotten its origin so completely. The archive is no longer forbidden. It is necessary." The chamber shuddered. The book pulsed. The voice grew faint, not fading, but withdrawing, as though stepping behind a veil. "Elior, the rest is not yet yours to see. When the world is ready, the archive will open. Until then, remember what others have forgotten." The glow dimmed. The linen closed. The hum ceased. The chamber exhaled one final breath, warm, sorrowful, ancient, and fell into complete silence. Elior rose slowly, supported by the young woman. His face was wet with tears he didn't remember shedding. He touched the linen gently. It was still. The unsealing was over, but not undone. As they ascended the stair, the corridor behind them sealed. The cedar door closed with a soft sigh. Dust fell into place, as though restoring a forgotten tomb. They emerged into the temple courts just as the first light of dawn touched the stones. Jerusalem woke, unaware. The world breathed as it always had. Nothing seemed changed. But Elior knew the beginning had stirred, and when the world forgot enough, the archive would open again, not to destroy, not to punish, but to remind creation of the truth buried beneath its own heartbeat. The book Moses wrote in fear and fire was waiting. Its hour would come, and its memory would not be silent forever.